We made this.
Welcome to the Starlight Ballroom. Hey!
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast. My name is Kurt North. All right, dudes. With me to talk about episode 1, which is The End, one of which is my co-host, Mark Adams. Mark, how are you doing, mate?
I'm all right, Smeghead.
Gee, thanks. It's almost like we've just done the pilot. We've introduced the two main characters, and now we're going to introduce the third one. Colin Brown. Colin, how are you doing, mate?
I'm all right. How you doing?
I'm good. It's nice to speak to you again. I spoke to you back over a year ago now with Pick Up a Podcast, wasn't it? It's a bit of time ago.
Yes, but I've heard you like on podcasts since then, so it seems like, nowhere near that long.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I'm basically slutting myself out to any podcast that'll have me at the moment.
We're all podcast sluts here.
Oh, absolutely. So we're here to talk about episode 1. This is the beginning. Myself and Mark talked about just briefly about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it and how it's all going to work. And I asked Mark the 5 questions that we've got. We've actually got 6 questions. Oh. But the 5 main questions of the officer's exam, as Arnold Rimmer would quickly run away and start writing "I am fish" on it.
I've written all the answers on my sleeve, on my arm, but it's all smudged. Bollocks.
Oh well, never mind. Well, luckily, I've as I did with Mark last week, I actually dropped this bombshell on him 5 minutes before it was due to go live. So again, same with you, Colin. And I might just do that with Matt Latham. And who else was there, Mark? Who else were we getting on?
Carl Bryan is the new guy.
Carl Bryan is our new guy as well. So we'll drop that.
Do it to all 3 of them. Why not? You didn't.
Yeah, exactly.
Seems fair.
Exactly. Question 1 would be: when did you first discover Red Dwarf, or what is your first memory of seeing the show?
I first discovered Red Dwarf in round about the 27th of March 1992, because it was the day after Back to Reality, the last episode of Series 5. So I was 10.
Oh, right.
And yeah, I watched, my dad had videoed the entire series, and I watched Back to Reality was the first one that I watched, and then I went back and watched the rest of that series, and then throughout the rest of that year, they were being repeated on BBC Two, I think it was, throughout the year, all the previous series. The Red Dwarfs magazine came out that month as well, so I remember buying that straight away. I basically became completely obsessed with it as a 10-year-old for in an incredibly short space of time. I went from hearing my dad talking about it and wanting to watch it, and then watching it and going, this is actually better than I thought it was going to be. And yeah, being completely obsessed with it. I think 10 is probably the right age to start watching Red Dwarf, really. So, it's got...
Yeah, I mean, I was saying that I was 7 in 1987, 1988, and I think I started to watch it around that. If not, it might be a similar thing to you, actually. We were talking to Mark about this last week, that I think if I didn't do that, it would have been around the 3rd season, which would make me about 10.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be surprising if that was the case. Mark, what about you? What age would you have been then?
I think I'm a similar age to you. I think I'm only a year older than you, so I think it was a similar thing. I think we all kind of arrived at Red Dwarf. The 3 of us arrived at about 10.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I've got to show it my daughter in 6 years' time then.
Okay, so just while we're talking about that then, have you seen, Mark hasn't seen the later seasons that have been on Dave, or most of them. Have you seen the seasons right through, or?
I haven't. I listened to your episode that you did of Don't Say the C Word, and my experience is almost identical to Mark. I watched the Back to Earth ones and thought, oh, this is really disappointing. And I've not actually watched any since. Even though I've heard that they're loads better and do want to go back, I just haven't got round to it. I am going to. I'm going to rewatch everything all the way through. But, I loved it. Absolutely up to the end of Series 6 and a bit of Series 7 was where it was the most perfect thing in the world. But then tailed off a bit for Series 7. Then obviously there was a gap for ages. And by the time it came back and I wasn't quite into it, it kind of left me behind. But I have heard really good stuff about some of the subsequent series on Dave, so I am going to check them out. Part of the problem is I never watch anything on TV as it's broadcast ever. Right. Our TV reception is utterly terrible. So I only ever watch stuff downloaded or on Netflix. So we never just stick Dave on. Are you still
in 1987 then?
No, we're in Birmingham. No, it's same in this house and our previous flat. We've just lived in areas of Birmingham with shit TV reception.
But to be honest, I'm absolutely with you on that. I haven't even tuned in a fucking aerial to my television. The only thing I've watched live in the last probably 5 years is Eurovision, and I've done that through the BBC iPlayer. I don't watch anything live. I watch everything back by catch up or Netflix or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of the reason why I haven't watched the Dave ones myself, is because I didn't find them very easy to access once they'd been broadcast on Dave.
Yeah.
It's interesting that that's Eurovision, because that's the one thing that I don't watch. I watch everything else on television, but that's
as a gay, it is my duty to watch Eurovision.
well, as a straight man, I used to watch it when I was younger. My brother, who sadly passed away, he was 5 years younger than me, and he used to watch Eurovision absolutely without fail every single year, and I couldn't get away from it. Put it that way. It was literally he'd be at me all the time saying, "I'm watching it." So it's certainly something that I haven't watched for a long, long time. But it's just it's their own, as I say. It's not. Whatever pleases you. I
don't know. I mean, I don't want to talk about Eurovision, really, because if I get excited about something, I start a new fucking podcast. So
I was going to say that'll be your next podcast, yeah.
Well, trust me, as much as I enjoyed our last conversation and that we ended up doing this podcast, I might not join you on that one. So anyway, let's move on to question 2, Colin. So question 2 would be, what would be your favourite episode?
It's a tough one because there's so many good ones. I mean, Back to Reality being the first one I ever watched will always sort of stick up there, but I think probably Polymorph. Even though the first 2 series there are no aliens, and it seems to be quite a good thing that it hasn't. When they started bringing them in, it's another thing that at the same sort of age of when I was watching it, aliens meant a lot to me. I wanted aliens in everything. Polymorph was basically cool as fuck because it was a shape-shifting, scary-ass alien that was also incredibly funny because it turned into a pair of boxer shorts and constricted Dave Lister's bollocks, which, as a 10-year-old, was fucking hilarious and still is.
Do you know what, Mark? I'm just thinking back now on our recording last time about our favourite moment. I don't think I answered that question. I think I said that yours was a good one, and I started talking about that, and I didn't answer it, and that would be my favourite moment of the boxer shorts.
Yeah,
I do. I honestly, I'm going to have to listen back now. I'm pretty sure I didn't answer that question, even though Mark did. But yeah, it's a fantastic scene, that, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
It's an amazing scene, and just again, it goes back to that hammy. That's why I was talking about it before. It's the hamminess of things like Rimmer being withdrawn from the Starbug, and it's totally an action man, for example. And that would be my moment is exactly is that moment. That's my favorite moment. But we're not on that question for you yet, so you've got a jump start on us here. So what would be your favorite season? What do you class it would be your favorite season of the show?
I think overall probably season 5. But no, season 4's brilliant. It's going to be 4, 5 or 6. Can I just have all of them? Yeah, no, I'm going to go with season 4 because you got DNA, which is ace. You got Justice. I absolutely loved that episode. You got Meltdown. I remember absolutely loving at the time. Yeah, I'm going to go with season 4.
We did this last episode where you start naming off the episodes and go, actually, no, I'm not going to fucking have that. I'm going to have season 4. Because I think I said season 6. No, I said season 3, didn't I? But then you've just mentioned like 3 episodes in season 4. I'm like, oh yeah, Justice. Yeah, what a great episode that is. And I think that's the real good thing about Red Dwarf in the seasons is that, you know, there's so many classic episodes. Yeah. It's unbelievable.
And it's not just the fact that it's really funny, it's the ideas. I mean, like Justice, where, you know, everything that you do gets done to you in the justice field is a brilliant idea. You know, set fire to something and your jacket catches fire. It's fantastic.
Question number 4 would be which character do you identify as your favourite character and why? It could be anyone. It could be any of the main cast, or it could be a guest as well. So
it's always going to be Lister. He plays the guitar. I play the guitar. I'd like to think I'm better than he is, but then he thinks he's better than he is as well. So
yeah. I've said Crichton. Mark has said the cat, and you've said Lister.
Excellent.
Fingers crossed. Carl says Rimmer.
I think that says a lot about the show, though, Kurt. The fact that all 3 of us have picked, in 3 in a row, have picked 3 different characters and have justified it mainly by saying they're brilliant. And the reality is they're all brilliant.
Yeah. Do you reckon that means Latham will be Kachansky then?
I wouldn't put it past him. I would not put it past him. Or which version of Holly would he most identify with?
Yeah.
Yeah,
so
I think it's more likely that it's Holly than Kachansky.
That's fair.
Particularly Chloe Anna Kachansky. Oh, I've got my claws out already.
I know you can't do that this early. I mean, I know that Grogan's in this episode, but you can't come out that early, Mark. Just can't. Right. Okay. So yeah, that's really interesting, actually. So as you say, the fact that each of us have chosen different characters. And what particularly about Lister, obviously, apart from the guitar thing, is there anything from his repertoire that you particularly like, any kind of ideal characteristic of his, apart from the guitar playing?
Well, I mean, I'd like to think that I'm not quite as much of a slob as he is, right. But my wife would quite possibly disagree. I definitely have been over the years at some point. You know, his main thing, you know, he wants to have fun and stuff. Whereas, I mean, there's no way that I could see myself as Rimmer because he's way too officious, which is not my thing at all. Crichton is for me way too following rules and tidy. Cat is too fashionable to be me. But so I mean, Lister. The first time I ever tried a curry was because I wanted to be like Lister. So right. I did not go for the hottest one, you know, a Vindaloo or anything like that, because that would have been a very bad idea for a first curry. But yeah, definitely. I started off wanting to emulate him. I actually played Lister in a school play. We did. We had a school assembly back when I was probably about 11 or 12. And me and my mates wrote a Red Dwarf play, which was basically just ripping off bits of the series that we like best. And I was Lister in that with like dreadlocks made out of black wool and stuff like that. That was as far as the costume went. Thankfully, I didn't black up or anything like that because that would have been horrendous looking back.
Yeah. Wow. I was just about to say, do you have any photos? And then you said that. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to see any photos. You're all right.
There's a little bit of cultural appropriation, but not quite as bad as blacking up would have been.
Fantastic. Okay, so final question in the first round. The second round is more of an open question for you.
Okay.
But what would you consider to be your favourite moment of the show?
I think. So you've already. I feel like I can't go with the polymorph bit with the boxer shorts because you've picked that already, Kurt.
Well, I didn't. I meant to, but didn't actually do it.
Right, good. I'm having that one then. I'll go with that then.
And then finally, before we get into the main episode itself, the final question is, would you like some toast?
Has anybody got a muffin?
A crumpet? First of all, Mark, just before we kick into the actual episode itself, what are your general thoughts on this episode? How do you remember seeing it when you were younger, and what are your thoughts on this episode? Because obviously it needs to do a lot. It needs to explain what the whole premise of the show is. Do you think that it succeeds in that?
Well, for me, I think the thing I realised most rewatching this, I think it's probably been about 10 years since I've watched any Red Dwarf, but what I've realised is I just quote Red Dwarf all the time.
Yeah.
So much of the way I talk is completely plagiarised from Red Dwarf. My phraseology is basically Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Red Dwarf. And this first series, I've only watched the first 3 again so far, but having watched this first series, I'm like, in my head, it was series 5 and 6 that most influenced me. But bloody hell, half of these first episodes, I'm still quoting today. I said on Twitter the other day that whenever I look in a mirror, I'm going, how am I looking? I'm 41 years old and I'm quoting something from 1988 with an evolved cat who was really, really vain. I mean, there's something about this show that you just can't put your finger on it. But it's wonderful. It's so good. Beyond the fact that it's still bloody funny. All the jokes still hit. There's so little jokes that rely on you being from the 80s or 90s that I can spot, at least. I was just so pleased that it was as good as I remembered.
Yeah, there's one or two like references like Shake and Vac and Moss Brothers and stuff like that. But other than that, it's, it's totally, it's pretty much timeless. Apart from what it looks like, the humour is definitely timeless.
I think this episode in itself, we're going to be talking generally about the show in a lot of ways more than the actual episode, because it does set up so much, and there is a lot to talk about.
Yeah,
and as you say, the quoting of stuff, like Everybody's Dead Day, for example, is just like just will live on through the years, and there is even like sort of the new show. It still like uses a lot of pop culture that's in the now, so you're still going to get those comments. I think we'll see quite a lot of them as we go through the episodes. That there will be these little bits that don't really match up with the show, and people might go over people's heads. But they're generally only like 1 or 2, and it's just an off the cuff remark rather than the show itself. I mean, personally, for me, the actual beginning of this episode, and watching some of the ones of late, watching 12 and 11. And you'll have to forgive me for those people who did listen to the Don't Say the C Word. For some reason, I completely forgot that 12 existed. I don't know if I was in some sort of like black hole or something. 11 and 12 were filmed together, and it just was in my head that they were filmed together. It was one season, but it was split up over 2 years. But what I find really interesting is that the way that the stories are structured with Red Dwarf, and especially the end, you've got things that are littered in throughout the episode that pay off later in the episode.
Yeah,
and it does the same in Future Echoes as well. I know we're talking about that next week, but Future Echoes has the same thing. It's got the fist joke that goes all the way through it.
Yeah,
and there's a payoff towards the end, and the writing is of high caliber in that regard. And I remember actually reading the book as well, the novel.
Yeah,
and a lot of that was. So that it informs so much of it. So, Colin, what did you actually make of the overall of this episode? Then, what were your opening thoughts?
It's great. It's a really good establishing episode, because I don't think anybody's going to watch it and not understand the premise of what's going to happen from that. But it crams so much into the 30 minutes that you could understand if maybe somebody wouldn't follow it. But I think it still does explain it all really well, while being hilarious at the same time. Introduces all the characters so well, so that they're established and you know exactly what their character is straight away. The Rimmer and Lister's conversation right in the opening scene completely establishes their dynamic, that they're basically stuck together against their will and would really rather be anywhere away from each other. But it's the friction between the two of them that sort of, builds all the comedy. And then you've got, Holly establishes himself as basically, he's almost like a Shakespearean narrator or something like that. That is there. He's there a lot of the time to provide exposition, but at the same time, he gets half of the funniest jokes in the show as well.
It's funny. It's interesting you mentioned Holly. Just something that I wanted to bring up is that originally in the recording of this, Holly was played a lot straight, was just played as a straight computer. And it was, I think, towards the end of the season, and like the 4th or 5th episode in, that they were meant to. The original plan was to have 7 episodes. So the original plan was to, that 7th episode was going to be, whatever it may be.
Body snatchers.
They actually changed a lot of them, actually reinserted a lot of the Holly's stuff actually within episode 1, because he was played very straight. And I think Norman Levitt had said something along the lines of, you're not using me to my best of my abilities, and that became an absolute staple of the show.
He also, Norman Levitt persuaded them for him to actually be on the screen, because initially in the script he was just a voiceover, and apparently Norman Levitt used to just go around to everybody who would listen, pointing at his face, going, "You're not using this." And
thank goodness for that, is all I can say. The Holly is one of the best parts about Red Dwarf.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, he is. He's got some memorable lines, and it's especially when they disappear, and obviously Holly gets changed, mid seasons. But when he ever comes back, and spoiler alert for those who haven't seen some of the Dave ones, he does come back in some of them.
Yeah.
But some of the remarks that he makes when he comes back, and you get the cheers and stuff, because he's so loved, that character.
Yeah.
And but he's the one-liners just are absolutely classic. I mean, some in season 8 are amazing when they find him there as well. I think he's an incredible piece. And as you say, I didn't realize that he wasn't meant to be on screen. I did know about obviously the story with reinserting, but the fact that he had to persuade him, you just think what it would be like without Holly giving that exposition, and not having those lines.
Yeah, absolutely. Even before we meet the characters, we are given the scale of Red Dwarf just by the theme tune. I feel like the whole thing was just really, really well thought out from the very, very beginning. Like you said, the establishment in the first scene gives you the relationship of the two main characters.
Yes.
But before that, the theme tune itself shows you just how big Red Dwarf is, with Lister painting the F, and then it kind of scaling out. And you two have been really bitchy about the quality of the sets. You can't be dissing the models. That looked so good.
Red Dwarf is one of my favourite models in any sci-fi TV show, without a doubt. I absolutely love Red Dwarf, and I love Starbug as well, and the Blue Midget. So yeah, I'm not being bitchy. I absolutely love the some of the designs and some of the stuff that they do with it. So I'll correct you on being bitchy, but you're right. I mean, the one thing that they got absolutely spot on from a sci-fi point of view is the model making, because that is second to none.
The original model for the title sequence where it's going over the top of the camera, that wasn't the original plan. So the original model was quite plain on the bottom. And when they decided that they had to do that, they had to send somebody down to a toy shop to buy loads of Airfix kits and just glue loads of random bits on the bottom of the model and paint it all red again, so that it was consistent all over the ship. Because originally it just had sort of a flat base, because they weren't necessarily expecting that you'd be able to see that bit.
So, and again, that just goes to show, geniuses at work, doing what they need to do to make it look good. And I think, as I say, it's it is a staple of the show. I don't think I know that Red Dwarf eventually goes missing for quite some time.
Yeah,
and it's quite interesting the way it comes back. But yeah, I do. You're right. It does give that scope, doesn't it? And I don't think there's any. I think in Future Echoes he mentions about the fact that the ship is the size of a city, for example. And I know that the levels consistently change now and again, but that doesn't bother me in the slightest, really. But I think it's actually quite funny.
I don't want to spend this podcast finding the inconsistencies and the retcons. I don't want to do that. I just want to enjoy it.
Yeah, they're not important.
Half the time, I don't even remember them anyway. Because if it's on level, because I'm sure that if you look at the numbers that are on the opening scene, that they're on level 362, and then it's realised, well, hang on, there's only 400, there's only 200 levels or whatever. It doesn't bother me in the slightest. So I think it's just more a mention of it at the moment, but we definitely won't be talking about it moving forward.
Well, that's it. I think things like that is important maybe in something like Star Trek or the X-Files, where it's more serious. Yeah. But it's primarily, as well as being sci-fi, it's a sitcom, and that's not, it's got cartoon logic in some bits. There'll be bits where, Lister's had his appendix out about 4 times. You've got, so many sort of inconsistencies happening here and there. But it's not just in Red Dwarf. I've just recently been watching, I'm years late catching up on it, but the last couple of weeks, me and my wife have been watching Friday Night Dinner, which I'd not seen before, but is really, really funny. But there are life-changing things that happen in one episode, like one of the characters gets married and then divorced in the same episode, and that's never mentioned at all ever again. And that's because it doesn't matter. You're there to laugh, and it doesn't matter about all the supposed inconsistencies and stuff like that. And Red Dwarf is exactly the same.
Yeah, and that's probably a good thing to move on a little bit, because one of the things that I particularly like about this episode, it in some ways plays out a little bit like Porridge, because it's, I think they had at the time, there was some concerns that I think they wanted to get a list of hosts of actors in to to have this grand plan of, like, you've got all these main characters that are going to be great. It's going to be a ship full of people. It plays very much in the bunks with the bunks as well.
Yeah.
That you've got Rimmer and Lister that are forced together, as you said at the beginning, when they're actually at the dispensers and stuff like that. That they are kind of working together, and it feels like almost like a prison ship, even though it's a mining ship.
Exactly.
That's the way that it kind of comes across. But then they obviously the idea was to bring in these actors and stuff like that, and then kill them all off as the surprise. But obviously they couldn't afford to do that. So
yeah, there was an early concept for the pilot script where they were going to hype up. They were planning on getting a lot of well-known actors as the other characters, and focus on them and have Lister and Rimmer almost as extras until the stasis bit happens, and then kill off all the people. And apparently, in the original trailers and stuff that they were showing, they tried to hide the fact that everyone was killed, so it was still a surprise. Which obviously for all of us, we're watching it years later, we know pretty much before we've even watched the end that that's what the premise of the show is. But to people watching it for the first time, that would have been a shock.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. And when you think about spoilers for Game of Thrones, skip forward 30 seconds, when you think about the end of Series 1 of Game of Thrones, that was shocking.
Yeah.
When
absolutely.
Everyone thought that the main protagonist was going to get out of getting his head cut off, and then he got his head cut off.
Yeah.
And I think that this probably hit a similar vibe. It didn't work for me because I'd watched like Series 4, 5, 6 before I watched Series 1.
Yeah.
But at the time, I bet it was bloody brilliant.
Yeah, and I never thought of it that way either, because again, I don't remember it too much enough to remember what episode I saw first, and it does. I do think that I probably saw season 3 first, so yeah, it would be interesting to see this completely fresh and give it to somebody, give it to a kid now at 10 years old and watch them watch it, or or anyone really, just to see if that was something that would that would surprise them. So yeah, I think it's interesting that you should say that. With the opening and sort of the introduction to Lister and Rimmer, it's interesting how they're both given their characters are both given something, aren't they? So Lister's is more about the fact that he's wanting to get to Fiji, and Rimmer's is that he's wanting to pass his exams. Do you think that and that's something that plays throughout the series as a whole? But but you mentioned about being a sitcom. It is interesting how they kind of cement them in their aspirations to begin with, isn't it, really?
Yeah, their motivations are there from the start. It defines the characters really, really well.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and what do you make to the dichotomy of the fact that you've got these two characters who are obviously kind of complete opposites? That you've got Lister, we see in the funeral, not in the funeral scene, but just before that, where the funeral of George, and then it basically heads towards Lister talking to Patterson and getting him to do the coin trick.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, kind of Rimmer's off to one side and is kind of the dweeb of the school class, effectively. So what did you make to having the polar opposites as a good situational comedy to be in, really?
The tension is, like I said before, it's what sets it all up, and it immediately makes me want to be on Lister's side and not on Rimmer's, because I would have been at the time. We're all doing that coin trick at school. Me and my mates hanging around at school were Lister, Peterson, Chen and Selby. We were the ones sitting there having a laugh, taking the mickey, and the ones necessarily following all the rules were the Rimmers, and we didn't want to be like them.
Now, it's interesting you say that, because I would be coming at it from the exact opposite. I knew damn well I was the lawful, good, swotty kid who was a lot like Rimmer, despite the fact I wasn't particularly pleased with it. I aspired to be like Lister and didn't like Rimmer because he reminded me too much of myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that.
I'm coming from a little bit from that angle as well. I was kind of like the one that would follow the rules, or the one that was a bit geeky, and had a couple of friends here and there, but I wasn't with the football lads, for example. It wasn't something.
We weren't with the football lads.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Oh no. But that's kind of what I'm saying, though, is that there was like the groups of people, and I generally was a bit more in the geeky. I mean, even to the point where I always remember in school, I was in the French class, and I'm sitting there at the front. And looking back at it, you go, "Oh, why on earth was I sitting at the front of the bloody classroom? Why was I doing that?" And there was a kid who used to, in hindsight, he's obviously got some mental issues, and he actually grew up, and I still am aware of him. He's around somewhere now, but he does have mental issues, and at the time, it probably wasn't recognised, but he used to often run out of class, and it used to be Kurt, and then a point out to the door to go and get him. So I was the one that had to go and get him all the time. So I'm like, oh god. So I can see it from that point of view that
Kurt,
that I would recognise more as a Rimmer than a Lister, definitely.
Fair enough.
We're finding all kinds of stuff. It's a nice introduction to us all, isn't it? Really.
Yeah. I think it's important how it resonates with different people so well.
Yeah.
We came at it from different angles, but we all came out of it loving the programme.
Yeah.
I've never smoked, but I thought smoking was cool. And Lister putting his cigarette in his ear is the coolest thing I'd seen in my life,
Yeah. So what do you think generally to the humour then? Because it's not so much here, but later on in the season we'll get some of this, but there's a lot of psychological humour that goes on, isn't there? There's a lot of like straightforward, straight up humour with Lister getting bored and asking to be quiet, and then when he's really quiet, he doesn't say anything, and then he gets put in report for that. But then you've got likes of Rimmer when he's putting him on report, and the Todd Hunter comes in and turns around and said, "But you are a smeghead," and it's very, very direct humour. But there's also the as we get into the show a lot more slapstick and stuff, and it is amazing how much they can stretch themselves with it. But this one's pretty much all about conversational humour, isn't it? Really, Mark. What do you think to the humour in this particular one?
I don't want to be a cliche, but it's very British, isn't it?
Yeah.
I know that's the easy go-to, but I do think it's worth acknowledging. There's even a accent thing that's implicit, that Lister is from Liverpool and Rimmer talks with a more RP kind of an accent.
Yeah.
And for British people, that's something that will immediately resonate. Whereas I don't know whether people from other countries would even clock that dynamic.
Yeah, it's almost a class thing, although it's like Lister definitely very much working or lower class, whereas Rimmer, while actually being working class or lower middle class himself, is definitely aspiring to be higher.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I was going to bring up, actually, Colin, is his aspiration, because he wants to make people believe that he is superior to everyone else.
Yeah.
Then, from an emotional and reactionary point of view, he says, I am fish, I can't handle it. Or like in this scene, for example, with the, you mentioned it before, with writing all over his hand, which again, and then Mark, I'm only going to say this once, okay, so I'm not going to say it anymore. It's played for as a sitcom, as a joke, the fact that, because he's never going to be able to read anything up on his upper thigh, but the fact that, that those jokes are in there, but it plays to Rimmer's character that he wants to aspire to be somewhere that he's clearly not capable of doing, but he wants to get there, and he wants to feel that superior complex because of the very nature of his background. And we find multiple different versions of his background as we go through the season, even to the point of the more later ones. And I think that you'll find out when you get into the Dave ones that they find Rimmer, they find a rhythm of Rimmer a lot easier than they would find for Lister.
Yeah.
And they did probably do for the whole 6 seasons, really, but they really kind of find the heart of Rimmer later on in the Dave versions.
Yeah.
But for this, it's that aspiration, and I think that it's you can say he's the one that's like kind of like obey by the rules and stuff like that, but he's a lot deeper than that. Mark, what do you think to that? Really,
I've always thought, is Lister the main character, or is it Rimmer?
Yeah.
Because Rimmer has a lot more, maybe not character development, but analysis of his character, and he has in a lot of ways, has more of a journey than Lister does.
Yeah.
I think he's brilliant, because even though he's fundamentally unlikable on a first impression, there's something about the way, the sympathetic way that Chris Barry portrays him, that even though he's a smeghead, you still kind of like him. And that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. That's made me think a fair bit with what Mark said there. I'm wondering if it was a little bit like when The Simpsons first started, whereas the idea was that Bart Simpson was the main protagonist and the rest of the family were supporting characters. But as The Simpsons went on, it became more about Homer. I wonder if the original intention was Lister as the main focus, and then sort of shifted. I mean, particularly later on when you've got episodes like Rimmerworld, and like you said in the Dave series, where they're shifting towards a lot more backstory for Rimmer.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with that, I mean, I'd say without going too much into Dave one, they really do find they find it easier to write for him.
Yeah.
And but he does become kind of the heart, and they keep going back to that well.
Yeah. Which
some people potentially might say that it's a well that's delved into a bit much, but when you've got that much of a character, and you see it here, this is what I mean with this show, is that in episode 1 we're already talking about his superiority complex, the way that Chris Barry plays him, but you still see the fact that he does have aspirations, and that he's stuck where he's at, and he's not where he wants to be. He wants to be seen more. And now, obviously, in this early part of it, you don't feel as much for him as you would do moving forward. But I think it's very true what you say about the Homer Simpson thing. The X-Files is something that I holds dear to me. It was very much a Mulder story, but it quickly became apparent that Gillian Anderson was a fantastic actor.
Yeah, and
the thing shifted there as well. That as much as I love Mulder, a lot of the point of view was told through Scully. So
yeah.
I think that, when you find the right kind of balance, I think that if they're able to move things around, then that really does work quite well. The actual idea from this, obviously, we've talked about the fact that Lister is the kind of the Liverpudlian, the fact that there's this class thing going between them. You've got the aspirations of both these characters, and then we find that that Lister has this cat on board. Now, it wouldn't be amiss of me to basically say that everyone's probably seen the Smeg Ups, but that cat is caused particular problems in the in the production, didn't it? Really?
Yes. Frankenstein did not want to behave, did she?
No. Absolutely not. And the milk pouring was kind of one of those things where it wasn't supposed to happen, but it was kept in the show.
Yeah.
And apparently, I've read recently that you can, if you view quickly enough, you can see a testicle, apparently, of our good friend Craig Charles.
Wow.
So yeah, that's something to look back on. I mean, even at this early stage, I know I mentioned the novel before, but the premise, the actual premise of the show, we're talking about it being a situation comedy. People would say it's a sci-fi show, and we'll talk about that in future echoes. The actual premise, the actual writing here of the fact that there's a cat aboard, and we've got Captain Hollister saying the fact that it could cause all kind of harms, it'll get put down.
Yeah.
That Lister at the end of the day also builds in that element of Lister as well, that he's not going to let that cat die. He would rather take the punishment than to do that. And that's something that he's a very honourable man as well, isn't he?
Yeah.
In that way. And but what did you make to the story, the kind of setup that they've got here, that they put them now 3 million years into space because of that, but the actual way that they put Lister into it because of his choice not to let that cat die?
I think they had a very, very clear idea of how they wanted to set up the show, and the way they did it was really quite original and unusual. Even as far as the funeral, where they had George established as the hologram and talking about how holograms worked, you thought that it was going to be George as the hologram for the whole series.
Yeah.
And then they flipped it on its head with a really nice little sci-fi twist. So, as much as we've been talking about how it's parody and how it's a sitcom, there's a real element of proper sci-fi in there as well.
Yeah.
I think it's clear that Rob Grant and Doug Naylor were both absolutely fans of comedy, but also fans of sci-fi as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's so very well done. In the space of, 24 minutes, it's set up perfectly. This episode, I said I was scared that they weren't going to hold up. And I don't think the sets are that rickety. They're a bit bare, but there's so much to love about this, and it really does establish it so well.
Yeah, it's not Faulty Towers rickety. Don't get me wrong. I think what I'm meaning is as you head more into the series, there's certain things that are used that you can tell but that's what gives it its sheen to the show, really. But you're right. Yeah, it's definitely the story is so well thought out, and I think that they do put a lot of effort into making sure. I mean, this took 3 years to actually come to screen. When they started the first draft 3 years before it started, so some of the things that they do and they put in here really works well.
You can tell that it's a labour of love.
Yeah, absolutely. Colin, so they come out of the 3 million years and everyone's dead. I don't know if you're aware of this, Colin. Everyone's dead, Colin.
Yes.
Everyone's dead, Colin.
What, Peterson?
They're dead. They're dead.
Everybody's dead, Colin.
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
It's a recurring thing for quite some time, and I must admit, as much as I actually love comedy in general, that I love repetitive comedy.
Yes.
And you speak about The Simpsons. I love it when Sideshow Bob hits those rakes.
Yeah.
He's just going,
yeah.
And he does that for ages. And this is another kind of aspect to that. But yeah, so it's a really good way of sort of really informing us on what happens. And one of my favourite lines, which I didn't pick up with on the first view the other day, but I picked up just before we came to air, was when Holly says about the snows the snow is to grit the paths with.
Kachansky was going to come with him to Fiji. She won't be much use to you on Fiji now, not unless it snows and you need something to grit the path with. Yeah.
So harsh.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean that's just Holly's comedy right there. That is totally my type of comedy, and I love that.
That's my favourite line in the episode.
Oh, yeah. I don't know about that. I'll come back to favourite line of the episode, but Everybody's Dead Dave was so iconic, and my brother's called David. So it was it was particularly special for me because I could just Everybody's Dead Dave whenever I was around my brother. And as I said in the primer, I watched this with my brother again and again and again and again. And I just look at him when we watch this episode and he'd know what was coming and I'd say it word for word. And it's just such happy memories of this show.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, we also at this point meet the cat, and instantly we get an impression of who he is. His shadow, that it's there, and he's the element that he's vain, and that it makes himself look big when they appear.
Yeah,
and then we get the whole Fushal thing. So, what do you make, Colin, of the whole the fact that get these Chinese whispers effectively, which is 3 million years old at this point, with the whole Holy Mother Virgin birth and the even Kat saying no one believes that stuff, and Cloister the Stupid and Fushal and stuff. So what do you make to that element of the cat having this religion based on Lister?
Which makes as much sense as most other religions, I think. It's great.
yeah, probably, yeah.
Oh dear.
It's I love the fact that, like you said, it's like Chinese whispers, how it's sort of gone through the ages, yet at the same time it's retained so much of the story without being corrupted and added to by different generations of cats. I know that I think the recent special, which I've not seen yet, is sort of building up on that. But I love the fact that there was a holy war between two factions of cats, one of which had believed that his name was Clister, the other thought it was Cloister, and that was their only disagreement. And that's enough to start a war. And the bit where Lister's like, no, it's not Cloister, it's Lister. Lister the stupid is great.
It's pretty biting satire, and I'm a lot more aware of religion now these days, as I'm a humanist celebrant, and I looked at this episode with fresh eyes, having researched my own humanism and understood my own humanism a lot, and I kind of found that really, really kind of awkward, because I'm not the kind of atheist that will attack religion. It's so easy, and that is a direct mocking of holy wars, and the two different types of Christianity might, say in Ireland, might fight over something that if you're not religious you would think was silly. And I found it a little bit distasteful, but also really quite clever that they were doing it with cats.
Yeah. yeah. Because the actual way that the story mentioned, like the fact that it's over a word rather than anything else.
Yeah.
So the fact that, that's very kind of like something you could imagine. I know we project our kind of feelings and stuff onto animals, and I think that's probably true in a lot of ways, but the way that we perceive cats, you could totally understand the reason why it would be just over one word, really. And as you say, that's quite clever.
Yeah, I did also want to talk about the funeral. I don't know whether you noticed, it was humanist. There was no elements of religion in George's funeral, and at the end it was played for laughs, but didn't they play was it Another One Bites the Dust that they played?
No, it was it was originally See You Later Alligator, but on the Netflix version it's Here We Go, Here We Go, Here We Go, because they haven't.
Do you know
that's
what?
Right.
Do you know what? Do you know what? I watched that yesterday, and I was looking, going, I don't remember that being that song, and I couldn't for the life of me. It didn't click. But that now you say that, it totally clicks that that's a different song.
Interestingly,
I hadn't spotted it, but yeah, it was the Netflix version I watched as well.
Interestingly, the subtitles on Netflix still say "See you later, alligator" plays, even though it doesn't.
Fantastic.
Right. Do you know what they do? They do the same in it's a rights issue, but they do the same in the X-Files when it was on Netflix. That the original version on the VHS of an episode called Beyond the Sea.
Does it not play Beyond the Sea in Beyond the Sea?
The actual song Beyond the Sea, but the French version.
Right, so it's still the same song, but a different version.
Yeah, it was basically they had the French version of Beyond the Sea for the X-Files, but then in the Netflix version, it was an English speaking version. So obviously that's something for Netflix, but yeah, that's a good catch, that, because I knew there was something off with that, and it wasn't so much that it was like me going, was that the music? It was more, there's something not quite right there. I don't remember that.
Yeah,
scene, and obviously that makes more sense.
Yeah.
I mean, regardless of whether or not it's "See You Later, Alligator" or whatever, the song was played for laughs.
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of funerals now where it has been whatever the person wanted. These are all true. I have done funerals with Another One Bites the Dust.
Yeah.
You've Got a Friend in Me from Toy Story, and Bat Out of Hell for when people were leaving the crematorium. And as much as it was played for laughs, it was almost predicting what people do in humanist funerals in 2020. How cool is that?
Yeah, I used to work for a funeral company where I was setting up the plans for people, and I had a lady who was telling me that she wanted to be dressed in fancy dress because her daughter-in-law was terrified of fancy dress, and she wanted Ding Dong the Witch is Dead to be played.
Amazing.
So we were like, yep, fine, I'll type that on there.
Brilliant. I mean, my brother's funeral was, he was a huge Bon Jovi fan, so he had It's My Life, and he had Bounce, which is basically No One's Going to Let Me Down, No One's Going to Keep Me Down, Bounce, Bounce. So,
wow.
So yeah, it's in, so yeah, it's interesting, that, isn't it? That I mean, 1987, that is so ahead of its game.
Oh, yeah.
You think about it in that way, it's absolutely incredible. So I think you've cottoned onto something there, Mark, and I think we'll maybe put it into the shows going forward. But before we do that, and what I'm referring to is your favourite moment from the episode. I think we'll do that at the end. But
sounds like a plan.
It sounds like a plan. That, talk about coming up with things live on air. But yeah. So other than that, I mean, there's obviously a few bits, and there's no point going through it scene by scene, but is anything else that you feel that I missed? We'll go with Colin first. Anything you feel that I've missed within the episode that you would like to bring up and talk about?
I like the casting of some of the bit part characters who are later way more famous. So you've got, obviously, Peterson was Mr. Weasley out of Harry Potter. You've got Chen was Nigel from EastEnders. I feel a bit sorry for Selby because he was a random bit part and everything else. So out of the four of them, he's the only one that didn't seem to be as well known as all the others afterwards. But then obviously you've got Claire Grogan as Kachansky, who was she was in Gregory's Girl before, but she was also the singer in Altered Images, who had a few hits in the early 80s, like Happy Birthday is the main sort of one. But yeah, I was watching a documentary on YouTube last night that was on the Body Snatchers collection DVD. It was the casting director was saying that there are actually two Claire Grogans on the Equity books, and he initially called the wrong one, and they actually had to dispatch someone to a train station to tell her not to come in because they'd made a mistake. And it was actually the one that had been in Altered Images and Gregory's Girl that they wanted to come in. So could have ended up with a totally different Claire Grogan. Maybe not. Well,
let's not upset Mark anymore.
Yeah, we won't mention the other Kachansky
yet. So, Mark, what would you say then? Anything that I haven't touched upon that you would like to go through?
I think one thing that I spotted that either I didn't remember or I didn't clock the first time was how much of a massive knob Kachansky actually is.
Right.
She was vile to Dave Lister, and watching it now with a bit more awareness than I was as a kid, I kind of feel like everybody's had that relationship. Well, yes, everybody is dead, but I kind of feel like everyone... you two. I kind of feel like everybody's had this relationship where the person was just fucking vile to them, but you were head over heels in love with them. Yeah. And you look back on it and you're like, what was I doing? This episode, like I said before, it's 25 minutes, but bloody hell, there's so much in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is, and I found that even with the next episode, which we'll talk about next week, again, it's packed with a lot of stuff, and there's enough to talk about. I mean, we've been going for almost an hour now, and there's enough to talk about for probably, if we went scene by scene, for another hour.
Yeah,
and it's just amazing that other TV shows that you might that I talk about, we can if we're talking by something that's brand new, you could talk about it for a couple of hours because it's brand new and you want to delve into everything. But all the recap shows that I do, unless there's like grand themes in there, you can generally talk around about an hour and 15 minutes for each episode, but each of them are normally 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Or 42, 43 minutes. And to condense everything into a 30-minute episode, which is obviously 20, as you say, 26, 27 minutes, I think is a real good feat. And, especially for a 1987 TV show that was shown on BBC Two, at 9 o'clock at night or whatever time it was. Okay, so thank you for coming through the end with me. What do you think? What would you say would be your favourite moment of the episode? We'll start with Mark, seeing that he alluded to this earlier on and came up with the idea.
It's just as simple as the cat's arrival, because I still quote, "How am I looking?" every time I look in the mirror, even if it's just in my head. I will always either actually say or think, how am I looking, whenever I look in the mirror. And that pink suit and the white Cuban heels, and he looks fucking ludicrous. But because Danny John Jules put so much into the reality, put so much into how he depicts the cat's confidence and love of himself, and it's just wonderful. It's like 30 seconds of perfection.
Yeah.
Excellent. And Colin, what would you consider to be your favourite episode moment of the episode?
I think I'm going to have to go with the Holly's conversation when he's explaining to Lister what's happened, and the bit with the she won't be much use to you unless it snows and you need something to grit the path with. It's just the best. Right. I love that line.
I'll try and pick something that's not that then. I'm probably going to say, and I think that this will be a case in point moving forward, something to look out for, is Rimmer's test, because both myself and my girlfriend watched this just before I spoke to Mark earlier today. We both looked at each other right before he pulls the face, when he looks at his hands, and he pulls the face up and he's like, "Oh no!"
Yeah,
because it's ruined everything that he's been leading up to. He's got all the answers. He's struggling with the answers as well, that he tries to sort of look up and, when Lister's around, and to make him look superior again, to make him look like the way he is. But when it finally gets to that punchline of, "I've got all the answers," and he removes his sleeve up and realises he smudged it all, and he pulls that face, because I think Chris Barry is a bit of a rubber mask, and I think that the reaction is priceless, and it brought out a laugh in both of us. So that's the scene that I would pull out from that.
Yeah, the whole bloody thing's great. It's ace.
It really is.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. That's the moments that we would like to pull out from it. So.
Yeah,
I do feel like that establishes just how much we're going to see of Chris Barry's non-verbal comedy.
Yeah,
and he is a fucking master.
Yeah,
yeah, and I think that, as you say, the amount of things within this episode that we get, Lister's slobbishness around. You get the fact that even like lines from Rimmer without him, with his comedy, his facial comedy. But things like when he says, "Brush your rolls, cradle a laughing child, interfere with a woman sexually," which just totally tells me what Rimmer's about, really. And just the fact that he's trying to be poetic, and he just can't sustain it. But yeah, overall, I think, as you said, as we've discussed, I think the characterizations, the story, does really well to give us this premise of what's to come. So I think it's time for us to depart. We need to head off into Starbug and go into a little mission. But before we do that, we need to find out where people are going and what people are doing. So, Mark, you're going to take the Blue Midget today. So, where can people find you online, and what podcasts are you currently on?
Okay, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at MarkAdamsHC. And if you want to look at my wrestling-based stuff, you can find Mark Adams Wrestling Ring Announcer on Facebook. You can also find Mark Adams Humanist Celebrant on Facebook. And I do far too many podcasts, so I'll just at them all. These are all Twitters, at Life's Milestones, at Don't Say the C Word, and at Pull or Pass.
Right, I do 2 podcasts, both music-y type ones. One's Free With This Month's Issue, where you can find us on Twitter at This Month's Issue. The other one's We Dig Music, where it's at We Dig Music PCast. But you can find both of those all collected together on wedigpodcasts.com and obviously on the We Made This network. Yeah, that's about it, really.
Excellent stuff. And we'll all be back next week for our coverage of Future Echoes, episode 2 of season 1. And you can find me on Twitter at rmuldrake. That's RMULDRAKE. There's also the Star Trek Picard and Star Trek Picard and Star Trek Discovery currently podcast, which is at Jean-Luc Podard, which is the Make It So podcast. Millennium, the TV show Millennium, I am also showrun that, and that's at The Time Is Now pod, and various other podcasts as well. And obviously the birth of this one, which has been absolutely fantastic. Co-host Mark, we're going to have a great time going through all of this.
I think
Colin,
we are.
Yeah. We are. I think this has been a great episode to kick off with, and I'm no doubt as the show does, we'll be finding our feet with as we go along, because we only came up with this idea literally over a week ago, after speaking for 26 minutes on air. But yeah, so that's fantastic. Colin, you're back next week as well. You're here for Future Echoes, so we'll see you then. But until next time, everyone, remember.
She's hot.
Previously on the We Made This network. The Movie Palace.
Are you a gangster fan generally, Andy, before we come on to The Public Enemy specifically? You like this kind of film?
I do. Initially, I'd watched a lot of gangster films just to see some of the origins of film noir. And I've noticed some of that, but it's, the gangster film is fascinating in its own right, but it really is its own thing. And, you can say it's still going on. And like you said, Bonnie and Clyde is kind of outside the, purview of your podcast, but, it's clearly it's still going on. There's still gangster movies being made.
Don't say the C word.
Yeah, and I think the kind of games you're talking about, the one that would epitomise that is Cards Against Humanity.
Yeah, I've got Cards Against Humanity there with most of the expansions, because again, while it's not my absolute favourite game, I enjoy playing it with the right group of people.
Yeah,
or it's always a popular one. If I'm going anywhere, that's the one I'll always get people saying, "Oh, can you bring Cards Against Humanity with you?"
Me too, and I think Cards Against Humanity is something almost a gateway. People see that there are games that aren't aimed at families, that are aimed at adults, that are a bit more maybe sophisticated or a bit more novelty than you would with the kids stuff.
Make it so.
It's like this mid-season point where it's like, okay, things are going to be different from here on out. And I love what they did with Michael and Ash. I thought, would you just get together already, for heaven's sake? This is not a soap opera.
But they did, they did that though. Looking back, they did it far quicker than I remember. In my head, it was more towards the end of the season that they start getting together. But it didn't happen that way.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.
Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast, was created and produced by Mark Adams and Kurt North. You can find us on Twitter at Red Dwarf Pod, and we are part of the We Made This Podcast network, which can be found online at wemadethispod.com or on Twitter at We Made This Pod.